mate. So I'm going to talk to you about what happens when you don't have diversity and what are some of the downsides. There's 4 lenses that we like to think about at Lendlease for diversity, and you can tell by which one is green and highlighted where I'm going to spend my time. But let me just quickly cover off the other 3. You can talk about diversity and inclusion and you can say it's important for compliance and legislation reasons. Can I tell you, if you work for an organisation where the only reason they do diversity is because it's for compliance and legislation, type your resume. You can look at it in terms of differentiating and compete. We want to be the best. We want to be better than our competitors. Good reason? Slightly boring. Sustainable workforce. We're going to be out of business in the next 20, 30 years unless we're drawing on a wider talent pool. Again, true, but let me talk about the most exciting thing I think is related to diversity, and that's about the opportunity for your organisation to grow and to thrive. So let's cast your minds back. For some of you, you can cast your minds back to the early 1970s. For some of you, you'll just have to trust me. For those of you who can't go back that far, I can tell you there was no internet, there were no smartphones. But in the early 1970s, 1972, a guy called Stephen Sasson joined an iconic company, a company that had been around since 1878, a company called Kodak. He was a smart young engineer, and he got bored very quickly. So someone said, we need to find a project for this guy. We need to find something that we can give him to do. So they put him on the CCD project, the Charge Coupled Device project. It wasn't very important to the organisation. Nobody really cared about it. It was just something that needed a smart engineer to work on, so that, they thought they'd put him on it. He invented this. For those of you that don't know what that is the first digital camera. He invented it in 1975. Took 53 seconds to make a 0.01 megapixel photograph. And the only thing he could do was display it on a TV. In fact, the research about the work that he did doesn't name anyone else who was involved in the experiment. So this first photograph of him was probably a selfie. So for the next 14 years, he and a team of people worked really hard, and they came up with this, the first ever digital single lens reflex camera, 1.3 megapixel. Hit the market in 1989. So you can imagine Kodak, iconic US company, been around since the 1870s, been on the Dow Jones Industrial Index for 76 years. They have invented digital photography. They have invented the world's first digital SLR. Surely they went from strength to strength after that. So what do you think happened? Share price. Big, big drama. So they completely missed the digital photography adoption phase. They completely missed the iPhone era. So in 1988, their share price was about $90 US. By 2012, it was 35 cents. So what went wrong? They invented it. How could it have gone so wrong? So what was going on in the organisation at the time? Let me talk about these blokes. Wally and Collie, as I refer to them. So Wally was a 42-year Kodak employee. He was a chemist. Kodak employed a lot of chemists. And Collie was a newbie. He was only a 40-year Kodak employee. And he was a quality control guy. So back in the mid-80s, Kodak employed 160,000 people around the world. They had manufacturing plants in 12 different countries. Quality control was hugely important. You didn't get to be senior in Kodak unless you were a quality control person or a chemist. So these guys were running the company. Something else very important happened in 1989 while they were inventing the first digital SLR. And Collie announced his retirement. So the board had to look for a new CEO. And the board really came down to 2 choices. Choice between a guy called Phil Samper, who was a marketing guy and a digital photography advocate, and a guy called Kay Whitworth. And Kay was a chemist. So what do you think the board chose? Kay Whitmore. They went for Kay. He was a very new employee. He'd only been with Kodak for 36 years. He was a chemist. When the board chose him, they said in their statement, we've chosen him at least in part because we think he will keep Kodak closer to its roots in film and chemical photography. And he destroyed the company. They destroyed the company. So in 1985, Kodak had a 90% market share. They had 90% of the photographic film production in the world. They made almost all the chemicals that developed film around the world. They made the machines that developed the film, and they made cameras, and they sold about $50 million of them in the years before. So they had, if you average all their product lines across the whole photographic value chain, they had about 85% of the world volume of photographic devices. And they blew it. They completely destroyed all of that value because they went for a guy who was so focused on the past and not thinking about the future. They invented digital photography and then they missed it. Do you think that looks like a diverse board? That was the board who made the decision, keeping Kodak closer to its roots in film and chemical photography. These guys, the average tenure of them with Kodak was about 33 years. What did I say the most common job was? Quality control or chemist? How many chemists do you reckon there were? Not all of them, but more than half. They were chemists. What do you think the other common thing about them was? If I were to say, what was their hobby? They were photographers. And if you were a photographer in the 1950s when these people started working for their organisations, that didn't mean you had an instant camera. That means you knew how to develop photographs in a darkroom. That means you grew up sniffing chemicals. All right? These people had been sniffing chemicals for 40 years. That's how they made their living. That was their hobby. They could not foresee a time when digital photography would pass film photography. For two reasons. First of all, when Stephen Sasson walked into the conference room and said, "This is what a digital photograph looks like," it was such low quality that they couldn't imagine that it would ever get past film. And the only thing that he could show them the photograph on was the TV screen. And they said, people aren't going to want to sit around watching their photographs on TVs. That's never going to happen. So they couldn't see the future. And they couldn't see a time when digital photography would be more important than film. And they destroyed a company. So Kodak, as I said, Dow Jones Industrial Average for 76 years, founded in 1878. 2012 in the US, they filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Gone. Now Kodak technically still exists. They sold off 550 patents that they had to pay their debts. They restructured, and they did spin off, I think, 2 companies. So one company does company printing and one company does some medical imaging. So technically, you can look it up and say Kodak still exists. But there was a company that in the mid-80s had 85% in every country in the world of the value chain of photography in their back pocket. And they lost it, and they destroyed it. And they did it because there was a lack of diversity of thinking around the board table. Not only were they all men, that was bad. They were all white, Anglo-Saxon, middle-aged men. They were either chemists or quality control people, and their main hobby was photography. How much challenge of each other do you think was going on around the board table? The answer is none. So diversity is important for all sorts of good reasons, but your company actually will not be in business without it. And if you have it, then you can grow. Thank you.